My mom's letter turned every memory into a lie, and I'll never get closure. What's the one thing about your childhood you wish you could unhear? I used to think the sharp click of my mom's nails against the kitchen table meant everything was normal. She'd tap out little rhythms while reading bills in her chipped red mug, the smell of instant coffee, always too strong, swirling with the faded lemon cleaner she scrubbed into every surface. The window above the sink was always fogged, wet fingerprints trailing down from when I pressed my face to the glass, waiting for her to come home. That glass is where I first learned how cold the world could be last week. Searching for my passport in her bedroom, I knocked over a stack of yellowed magazines and found a letter shoved behind her jewelry box. The envelope was thin, edges crinkled and greasy from being touched too many times. My name was written on the front, not in her usual loopy birthday card script, but in angry block letters. The second I picked it up, my fingers went numb. I could smell dust, old perfume, and something sharp, like nail polish. Remover, my pulse started pounding in my ears before I even opened it. I read the first line 3 times before it made sense. I wish I could start over without him. I never wanted to stay. But once he was here, I couldn't leave. I felt trapped every day. She wrote my name over and over, smaller and messier each time, until the ink bled through the words. Didn't feel like language, more like wounds scratched into paper. My hands started to shake so bad I had to sit down on the floor. The world seemed to tilt, the edges of the room buzzing and closing in my stomach twisted up, breath tight, skin prickling all over like I'd just stepped into snow barefoot. And all at once I was 7 again, sitting on the itchy living room rug with the sun turning the dust in the air, gold, stacking dominoes in silence, because Mom said headaches were worse when it was loud. She'd glance at me sometimes, eyes tired and far away, as if she was counting the minutes until I left the room. I always thought I was the problem. Maybe I was just too much for her. Now, I understand she was waiting for a different life. The letter's still hidden in my pillowcase because I don't know what I'll do if she ever asks about it. I don't know what's worse, the betrayal, or knowing she'll never admit it to my face. I barely slept the night after I found the letter. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the paper scratching my palm and smell that sharp sting of old perfume seeping into my pillow. My mind replayed every moment from childhood on a loop, but now the colors all looked wrong. The hallway felt colder, the kitchen quieter. I started noticing things I'd ignored for years, like how Mom never used my name unless she was angry, how she always left the hallway light on but never checked if I was awake the next morning. I watched her shuffle into the kitchen, in that oversized gray sweatshirt she's worn since I was 12. Her slippers made that faint scraping sound across the cracked linoleum. She poured coffee, adding exactly 3 spoonfuls of sugar, and left the mug on the counter without even glancing at me. The silence pressed in so thick I could barely swallow. I remembered my 8th birthday, the year she forgot the cake and just stuck a candle in a stale grocery store donut. She snapped a picture with her phone but never smiled for the camera later. When I looked at the photo, I saw that her eyes were already somewhere else. I stared at her now, wishing I could ask her if anything was ever real, but my throat locked up. I could feel my fingers tingling, knuckles going white as I gripped the edge of the table. I wanted to scream or run or throw the letter at her just to see if she'd finally look at me and tell the truth. She glanced at the clock and muttered under her breath about being late for work. The front door slammed so hard a painting rattled on the wall. I sat alone in the kitchen, the mug still steaming, and felt something inside me break that couldn't be fixed for hours. I sat there tracing circles on the table with my finger, remembering all the times I thought her silence meant peace. Now it just felt like being erased. That afternoon, I wandered the house like a ghost. Every room seemed smaller, the colors washed out. I noticed how the hallway mirror was always just a little dirty at the corners, how her favorite blue sweater still hung on the coat rack, untouched. Since last winter, there was a dent in the living room wall from the time I tripped and fell chasing our old dog, but the dog was gone now, and so was any softness in the air. I ended up in my childhood bedroom. The pale yellow paint was peeling above the radiator, and the old race car lamp still sat on the nightstand. Its switch stuck halfway, so it would flicker and buzz all night. I lay down on the scratchy quilt my grandma made, patches of different fabric, some faded pink, some with tiny white flowers. I pressed my face into it, hoping for comfort, but all I could smell was dust, and a trace of the soap Mom used when she washed my sheets, lemony and sharp. I stared at the ceiling, replaying another memory. When I was 5 and sick with the flu, Mom left a glass of flat ginger ale by my bed, but she never stayed to hold my hand or read a story. Her shadow would pass in the hallway sometimes, and I'd hope she'd come in, but she never did. I thought maybe she was busy or tired now. I realized she just wanted distance. I reached under my pillow and took out the letter. My hands shook so bad I could barely keep hold of it. I felt that gut punch nausea again, sweat beading on my forehead, chest tight like I was bracing for an earthquake. The words stared back at me, unchanged, and I wondered how many nights she'd lain awake wishing for a life without me. My vision blurred and the room seemed to tilt. I pressed the letter to my chest, wishing I could forget, but the truth kept echoing in my head, louder every time. The house felt emptier than ever that evening. I kept listening for her key in the door, for the familiar creak of the hallway floorboards, but every sound felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the cracks in the varnish, replaying every moment I used to think meant love, her tired voice reading the grocery list out loud, the way she'd fold my socks in tight little balls, the lavender scent of her hand lotion lingering on doorknobs, but now every memory tasted bitter. I kept flashing back to the time I was 9 and broke my wrist falling from the backyard fence. She drove me to the ER in silence, the car radio hissing static. She barely touched my hand, as the nurse wrapped my arm later. At home, she just left a note on the fridge. Soup in the microwave. Remember your pain meds? I waited all night for her to come check on me, but her bedroom door stayed shut tonight. I sat in the dark, listening to the old refrigerator kick on and off, the light from the street lamp turning the window yellow. My body felt heavy and numb, my hands cold even though I tried to warm them under my thighs. I read her letter again, every word digging in deeper, every line a bruise. I could almost hear her voice behind me. Flat, careful, distant, and it made my skin crawl. I wanted to ask her why, to hold the letter up and force her to see what she'd written, but the fear sat thick in my throat. Unmoving instead, I tore a scrap of paper from a notebook and wrote, "Was any of it real?" I left it on the kitchen table and climbed back into bed, heart pounding so loud I thought it might wake the whole house. The answer never came. I woke up before sunrise, my chest tight and jaw aching from grinding my teeth all night. The kitchen was still empty, the note untouched exactly where I'd left it. The silence pressed against my ears until I wanted to scream. I could smell burned toast from the day before still clinging to the walls, that stale, oily edge that never quite goes away. I sat at the table, tracing the grain with my fingernail, remembering the time I spilled orange juice all over her crossword puzzle, and she just stared at me for a long moment before wiping it up without a word. I thought I'd broken something precious, but now I wonder if it was always already broken. I forced myself to eat a piece of bread, every bite dry and heavy in my mouth. The clock above the fridge ticked so loud I felt every second pounding inside my skull. The world felt smaller, meaner, like it was shrinking around me. She came in just as the sun started to rise, wearing the same gray sweatshirt, hair pulled back, eyes set somewhere far away. She glanced at the note on the table, didn't touch it, didn't even look at me. She poured coffee, sipped it, her hands perfectly steady like she hadn't shattered my world with a few sentences scratched on a piece of paper. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat locked up every time I opened my mouth. My hands were shaking under the table and I pressed them to my knees, hard enough to leave marks when she finally left for work. I just sat there in the echo. She left behind my whole body buzzing with a cold, aching numbness, like I'd never be able to thaw out. By the afternoon, I couldn't stand being in the house anymore. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The tap dripping in the bathroom, the old pipes knocking behind the walls, my own breath catching in my chest. I wandered into the backyard barefoot, the grass wet and cold, sticking between my toes. I stood by the rusted swing set, its chains creaking in the wind, paint flaking off in blue strips. I remembered being small, trying to swing high enough to see over the fence, always glancing back to see if Mom was watching. She never was. I sat on the cracked stone steps, picking at the weeds that grew through the gaps, dirt under my nails, hands numb from the chill. I kept thinking about all the times I ran to her with scraped knees or broken toys, and she'd barely look up from her book or her phone. She'd say, "You're fine, just wash it off," and her voice was always flat, tired, never angry but never warm. The sky turned gray and heavy with clouds, and I felt it pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. I thought about the letter and how her words carved out everything I believed about myself. I remembered the way she used to tuck me in at night but never stayed long enough for me to fall asleep. I thought it was normal, that love just meant being nearby, not present. I wanted to throw the letter away, to burn it and pretend I never saw it, but my hands wouldn't let go. I could feel every heartbeat in my fingertips, every memory turning sharper with each pulse when the first drops of rain started to fall. I stayed outside, letting the water soak through my shirt, cold running down my back. My skin prickled with goosebumps, heart racing, feeling smaller than I'd ever been. When I finally went back inside, my hair dripping and my jeans stiff with cold, the house felt even emptier. I walked through every room like I was looking for proof that I used to belong here. The hallway smelled faintly of the lilac air freshener she always sprayed before company came over, but it only made my throat feel tight in the living room. I sat on the floor and pulled out the old photo album wedged between dusty board games and a broken lamp. The plastic cover was cracked, pages curling at the edges. I flipped through snapshots of birthdays, holidays, those blurry Polaroids where I'm always a little out of focus. I stopped on a photo from when I was 6. Me with a crooked paper crown, chocolate smeared on my face, Mom in the background turned away from the camera, her hand covering her mouth. I remembered that day, the way she let the candles burn all the way down without singing, how she hurried to clean up before the cake was even gone. I thought the silence was just her being tired, but now it feels like the quiet was always for her, not for me. I closed the album, my hands numb and clumsy, chest tight as if the room was shrinking again. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. My body felt heavy, my skin cold and prickling, every nerve raw from wanting something I could never name. When the front door finally creaked open, I stayed perfectly still, listening to her footsteps moving through the hallway, her keys rattling on the hook, the soft thud of her shoes hitting the mat. She didn't call my name, didn't check if I was there, and in that moment, I realized I could disappear, and nothing in this house would change. The hours crawled by as I listened to her move through the kitchen, the familiar clatter of plates, the hiss of the faucet, the microwave beeping twice, but she never said a word to me, not even when I walked in and sat at the end of the table. She glanced my way for half a second, then turned back to chopping onions, her face blank, eyes distant. The only sound was the knife tapping against the faded cutting board, the smell of sharp onion mixing with the stale scent of last night's coffee grounds. I watched her in silence, remembering all the times I tried to help as a kid, always reaching for the peeler or a pot, wanting her to notice me. She'd tell me, "Not now. Not today. Too busy for messes." I'd sit on the floor with my toy cars, rolling them across the tiles, listening for any sign that she wanted me near, but the only thing I remember is the chill from the linoleum and the ache in my knees. Tonight, the ache was everywhere, in my jaw, my chest, my stomach. I picked at a loose thread on my sleeve until it unraveled and snapped. I wanted to ask her about the letter, about all the years I spent chasing her attention, but my tongue felt thick, my mouth dry. My hands shook so badly I hid them in my lap, nails digging into my palms. She finished cooking, plated her food, and left me sitting there at the table with nothing but the sound of the fridge humming and my own breath echoing in the empty room. I stared at the spot where she'd been, the imprint of her hand on the counter, and wondered if I'd ever really existed for her at all. I spent most of the night lying awake, watching the headlights from passing cars slide across my ceiling. Every noise in the house felt magnified. The tick of the clock, the low rumble of the heater, the soft creak of floorboards. As she moved down the hallway, I kept waiting for her to open my door, to say anything at all, but the only thing I heard was the bathroom faucet dripping, slow and steady, into the sink around midnight. I finally got up and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The cold tiles bit into my feet and I stood there, staring at the fridge covered in old magnets and faded grocery lists. The light from the street lamps turned everything yellow and strange. I traced the outline of my hand in the condensation on the window just to prove I was still real. I thought about about the time I was 10 and woke up sick, fever burning behind my eyes. I called for her, my voice barely a whisper, and listened to her footsteps pause outside my door. She never came in. I spent hours clutching a damp washcloth to my forehead, listening to her laugh at something on TV in the next room. I always thought maybe she just didn't hear me, but now I know she was choosing not to. My heart pounded as I dug the letter out from under my pillow. The paper felt softer now, edges worn, the ink smeared in spots from sweaty hands. I read her words again and again, trying to find some other meaning, some reason that made it hurt less. But every line felt like a fresh bruise, and my stomach twisted with every sentence. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the letter on the floor, and for a second it felt like the world went silent. I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from screaming, cold sweat prickling down my back. Everything I thought I knew about love felt like it was collapsing, caving in from the inside. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to pale morning light spilling through the window. The letter was still on the floor, crumpled and torn at one corner. My body ached from lying curled up too tight, my mouth dry, tongue thick and bitter. I stared at the ceiling, counting the little cracks that looked like rivers on an old map. The house was silent except for the distant buzz of her hairdryer. Down the hall, I tried to imagine her morning routine: coffee, makeup, the same perfume that smelled like fake oranges and dust. Sometimes I'd hug her before school just to catch a whiff of that scent, hoping it meant she cared at least a little. Now it only makes my stomach twist. I got dressed in the same faded hoodie I've had since 9th grade, sleeves chewed at the cuffs, and crept into the hallway. Every step felt like trespassing. I could hear her talking softly on the phone in the kitchen, her voice light, almost cheerful. Nothing about her sounded broken or guilty. I wanted to storm in, shove the letter under her nose, force her to see the damage, but all my anger shriveled up when I saw her back turned, shoulders straight, hair clipped up with the same blue barrette she's worn for years. My hands tingled, breath coming quick and shallow. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something huge and empty. I backed away, heart pounding, and shut myself in my room again. I stared at my reflection in the window, the faint ghost of my face staring back at me, and wondered if she ever really saw me at all. The rest of the day blurred past me like I was underwater. I tried to focus on anything else, my phone, schoolwork, folding laundry, but every thought circled back to the letter. My hands fumbled, dropping clothes on the floor. Forgetting what I was doing halfway through each task, my body moved on autopilot, but inside everything was raw and scraping, nerves exposed. I kept seeing flashes of old memories, but they all looked different now, like someone had drawn over them in red ink. I remembered when I was 7 and begged her to come watch me in the school play. I waited by the gym door, clutching a plastic sword, watching the other moms hug their kids when mine finally showed up. She stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes on her phone when I looked for her during my lines. She wasn't watching at all. I told myself it was nerves or work, not something missing in her all day. I waited for her to notice me, to ask why I was quiet, to see the hollow in my eyes. She never did. She made dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, the only thing she ever cooked without burning, set a plate on the counter, and went back to the living room. Her laughter floated down the hall from some show I'd never seen. I sat alone at the table, twirling cold spaghetti around my fork, the clock ticking louder and louder until it drowned out every thought. I wondered if love is supposed to feel like waiting for someone who's never coming home. My hands shook so much I almost dropped my plate. I pressed them flat to the table, feeling the rough wood grain, forcing myself to stay grounded. My heart was racing, every breath short and sharp, as if I was bracing for an earthquake that had already happened. Late that night, I wandered through the house in the dark. Every floorboard creaked like it was announcing me as an intruder. I trailed my fingers along the cold hallway walls, feeling for something, anything, that felt like home. I ended up back in her room, the air thick with her perfume and something sour underneath. Like old laundry left too long, her jewelry box sat open on the dresser, tangled gold chains spilling out. I ran my thumb over the dented silver locket she used to wear when I was a kid, the one she always said was too special to touch. I remembered reaching for it once and her voice snapping at me. "Don't you dare, that's not for you." The words were sharp enough that I still feel them in my chest. I pulled open the drawer where I found the letter and dug through the mess. Scattered receipts, broken pens, a dusty hairbrush with strands of brown hair knotted through the bristles. I wanted to find something, some proof that I was ever wanted, ever chosen. But all I found was a faded birthday card with my name spelled wrong and no message inside, just Mom's hurried signature at the bottom. The room spun around me, cold sweat prickling at my neck, legs shaky and weak. My hands went numb as I clutched the edge of the dresser, knuckles turning white. My chest felt hollow, gutted, as if my whole life was being emptied out. Piece by piece, I pressed my forehead to the wall, eyes burning, willing myself to disappear. I wondered if she would even notice if I did, or if the silence would finally feel right. I didn't sleep that night, just listened to the house breathe, the low groan of pipes, the distant hum of the fridge. The wind rattling the mailbox outside my mind kept circling that question. Was any of it ever real? I pictured her in her room, door closed, maybe already forgetting about the note I left on the kitchen table. I remembered being 9, sitting on the back steps with scraped knees, clutching my old blue flashlight because the batteries made it buzz like a little engine in my hand. Mom stood in the doorway telling me to come inside before it got dark. Her voice was so flat, so tired, and I realized now it was never worry, just routine. My body felt hollow as I stared at the ceiling, my hands numb, heart pounding so fast it hurt. I pulled the letter out again, running my thumb along the edge, feeling the paper's softness and the grooves where her pen pressed hardest. I kept thinking maybe if I could just ask her, force the words out, she'd give me something, anything, but fear kept me silent. The next day blurred by. In a fog, I went through the motions, brushed my teeth, changed my clothes, left the house and wandered the neighborhood. The sun felt too bright, the air sharp in my lungs, every sound jarring and wrong. I found myself standing outside the bakery where she used to take me on Fridays after school. The glass smelled like sugar and yeast and old coffee, and the lady behind the counter still had that same chipped pink nail polish I remembered being 6, standing on tiptoes to watch them frost cupcakes text, thinking maybe if I was extra good, she'd buy me one most weeks. She just rushed me out, always checking her watch, always somewhere else. I walked home slow, hands shoved in my pockets. The letter folded tight and hot against my thigh when I got back. She was sitting at the table with a magazine and a mug of tea. Her eyes slid past me to the window. I wanted to ask her about the letter, to scream or cry or just demand a reason, but I just stood in the doorway, heart racing, skin prickling, throat too tight to speak. She said nothing. I said nothing. The silence grew so thick it felt like drowning. That night, the house felt colder than ever. I lay in bed, clutching the letter so tight it crumpled, the corners digging into my palm. I listened to her moving around downstairs, the soft creak of floorboards, the hiss of the faucet, her slippers dragging along the tiles. Everything sounded so ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was haunting my own life. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes ached, remembering when I was 8, lying in this same bed, tracing the cracks above me with my finger and wishing she'd come say goodnight. Sometimes she would stand in the doorway, light from the hall turning her face into a shadow. She'd say, "Sleep well," in a voice that sounded borrowed, then disappear before I could answer. I used to think it was just how grown-ups love, distant, busy, complicated. Now I know it was just the sound of someone counting the days until they could finally be alone. The letter still lives under my pillow, and her silence lives in every room. Nothing is resolved. Nothing is healed every time I look at her. Every time she turns away, I wonder if I'm just a chapter she's desperate to skip. If you found out the person who raised you never wanted you, would you confront them or would you let the silence eat you alive? Tell me in the comments. If you'd even have the guts to ask for the truth.